In a quiet Tennessee cemetery where a soldier's grave held memories of sacrifice, a German shepherd named Ranger stood guard with a loyalty that touched the world, sparking a tale of devotion that would unite a town. This is a loyal German shepherd stood over a fallen soldier's grave. His actions amazed everyone, a breathtaking journey of love, honor, and a dog's unbreakable bond that will leave you in awe of the power of loyalty. Settle in, hit that subscribe button, like, share, and drop a comment below to tell us where in the world you're joining us. Because at Pawprints Forever, we're sharing stories that prove even the bravest hearts can teach us the deepest lessons. The autumn wind whispered through the oaks of Willow Creek Cemetery, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves and memories long cherished. The golden light of dusk painted the gravestones in hues of amber and bronze, casting long shadows that stretched like silent sentinels over the hallowed ground. At the far end, near a row of military graves, stood a lone figure, a German shepherd named Ranger, his black and tan coat ruffled by the breeze, his amber eyes fixed on a simple granite marker. The stone read, Sergeant James Carter, 1995-2023, beloved son and soldier. Ranger's paws pressed into the soft earth, his body rigid, his ears perked as if waiting for a command that would never come. His collar, worn but sturdy, bore a tag with James's name, a relic of their time together in the deserts of Afghanistan, where Ranger had served as a military working dog, his keen nose sniffing out danger, his loyalty unwavering. Now James rested beneath the earth, taken too soon, and Ranger, retired and adopted by James's family, had found his way here, day after day, without fail. Helen Carter, James's mother, had noticed Ranger's absences first. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she would step onto the porch of their modest home on Maple Lane, her graying hair tied back, her voice trembling as she called for him. "Ranger! Come on, boy!" But the dog would not come. Not until he was ready. Mark, James's father, a retired mechanic with hands still stained by oil and grief, had followed Ranger's tracks one chilly morning. His boots crunched through the brittle leaves as he made his way through the cemetery, his heart heavy with the weight of loss. And then he saw him, Ranger, standing guard over James's grave like a sentinel, his body trembling with quiet devotion. "He's mourning," Mark had whispered, his throat tight, his eyes misting as he watched Ranger whine softly, his nose brushing the cold stone. The Carters had taken Ranger in after James's death, honoring their son's last letter. "If I don't make it take care of Ranger, he's my best friend." Ranger had arrived in Franklin thin and skittish, his fur patchy from stress, his eyes searching every corner of the house for James. Helen had spent weeks coaxing him to eat, her hands gentle as she offered bits of chicken, her voice soft as she whispered James's name. Mark had built a bed for him in the garage, but Ranger preferred the backyard, staring toward the cemetery, his barks low and mournful. The townsfolk knew Ranger's story. James had been a local hero, his funeral packed with veterans and classmates. But Ranger's daily vigil was a quiet act of love, unnoticed until a girl with a camera and a heart full of her own grief stumbled upon him. Lily Harper, 14 years old with auburn hair tucked under a beanie, often biked through the cemetery, her camera slung around her neck. She had lost her older brother to illness, and the quiet of the graveyard brought her a strange comfort. That morning, she spotted Ranger from a distance, his silhouette striking against the golden leaves, his stance unwavering over James's grave. Her breath caught in her throat. Creeping closer, her sneakers silent on the grass, she raised her camera and clicked, capturing the image of Ranger's amber eyes glowing with loyalty, his body a statue of devotion. She uploaded the photo to her social media with a simple caption, "A loyal friend at Willow Creek Cemetery #Soldier Dog." She had no idea the storm it would ignite. By noon, the photo had gone viral in Franklin. Shared by veterans groups, local pages, and heartbroken strangers, the hashtag #SoldierDog trended as comments poured in. "This dog's heart is breaking. James must have been a hero. This is the purest love I've ever seen." A diner on Main Street offered Rangers Salute pancakes, donating proceeds to a veterans fund. A school started a soldier dog fund in Rangers' honor, and Lily, wide-eyed and trembling, showed the post to her mother Emily, a nurse who had known James. Emily's breath hitched. "That's James's dog," she said, her voice thick. She immediately called Helen, who rushed to the cemetery, her hands shaking on the wheel, her heart pounding as she saw Ranger still there, his amber eyes lifting to meet hers, his tail giving the faintest wag. Helen knelt beside him, her voice breaking. "You miss him, don't you?" she whispered, her fingers brushing his fur, tracing the scars from Afghanistan, rough reminders of the life he and James had shared. Ranger whined, his nose nudging the stone, his body trembling with unspoken grief. Mark arrived soon after, his flannel jacket loose, his face etched with sorrow. "He won't leave," he said, his voice rough. And as Lily snapped more photos, capturing Helen and Mark beside Ranger, the dog's loyalty abridged to their son, the world began to take notice. A crowd gathered, veterans, kids, a local reporter, all drawn by the viral post, all moved by the sight of this dog's unwavering love. "He's guarding him," one veteran murmured, his voice rough, his cap clutched in his hands. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cemetery in hues of gold and violet, Ranger remained, his vigil unbroken, his love eternal. But little did they know a shadow loomed on the horizon. A military contractor, Apex Defense, had trained Ranger before James's unit, and their record showed they still claimed ownership. The battle for Ranger's heart was only beginning. The morning mist clung to Willow Creek Cemetery, softening the edges of the headstones as Ranger stood over James's grave, his black and tan fur damp with dew. His amber eyes never wavered from the granite marker, as if by sheer will he could summon James back. The scars along his flanks, faint lines from his time in Afghanistan, caught the pale light, silent testaments to the battles he'd fought beside his handler. Helen Carter arrived just after dawn, her greying hair loose around her shoulders, her hands clutching a thermos of coffee. She didn't speak at first. She simply knelt beside Ranger, her knees pressing into the damp earth, and rested a trembling hand on his back. "You're a good boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Such a good boy." Ranger leaned into her touch, his whine soft, aching. He nudged the headstone once more as if to say, "Where is he? Why won't he come back?" Mark joined them soon after, his flannel jacket hanging open, his eyes red-rimmed from another sleepless night. He set down a bowl of kibble, but Ranger ignored it, his focus unbroken. "He won't eat unless we bring the food here," Mark murmured, running a calloused hand over his face. The cemetery, once a place of quiet solitude, had become something else, a gathering place, a pilgrimage site. People came now, drawn by Lily's viral photo, by the story of the soldier and his dog. They left flowers, small flags, notes scribbled in crayon. "Ranger loves James." A child's drawing, taped to a nearby tree, showed a stick-figure soldier with a smiling dog at his side. Lily returned that morning, her camera in hand, her auburn hair peeking out from under her beanie. She didn't speak as she lifted the lens, capturing the way Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of Helen's voice, the way his body seemed to sag just slightly under the weight of his grief. Her mother Emily stood beside her, a nurse who had once treated James when he was home on leave. "He's grieving," Emily said softly, her eyes on Helen and Mark. "Just like them." The town of Franklin had taken Ranger into its heart. The local diner, Maggie's, had renamed their blueberry muffins Ranger's Watch and donated the proceeds to the Soldier Dog Fund. The high school started a charity drive in James's name. Veterans, some who had served with James, others who simply understood the bond between a soldier and his dog, came to pay their respects. Tom, a grizzled veteran with a prosthetic leg and a voice like gravel, left a small flag by the grave. His note was simple: "For Ranger and James." But as the sun climbed higher, so did the unease. Tom pulled Helen aside, his expression grim. "You heard from Apex yet?" Helen's stomach dropped. No. Why? Tom exhaled sharply. They've got a history of reclaiming dogs. Contracts are ironclad. Helen's fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. No, not him. Not after everything. That evening the email arrived. Helen's hands shook as she read it aloud to Mark. Per contractual agreement, military working dog ranger, asset ID 472, remains the property of Apex Defense. Arrangements for retrieval will be made within 48 hours. Mark's fist slammed onto the table, rattling the coffee cups. Like hell. Ranger, lying at their feet, lifted his head at the noise, his ears pricked. Helen sank to her knees beside him, burying her face in his fur. They can't take you, she whispered. They can't. But Apex Defense had lawyers, contracts. A history of winning. And Franklin? Franklin had love. Helen sat at the kitchen table, the Apex Defense email burning through her like a live wire. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. Military asset ID 472, as if Ranger were nothing more than equipment to be reclaimed. Across from her, Mark paced like a caged animal, his work-roughened hands opening and closing at his sides. Ranger lay between them, his chin resting on his paws, his intelligent amber eyes flicking between them. He sensed the tension, the grief thickening the air like summer humidity before a storm. A soft whine escaped him as he nudged Helen's knee with his nose. I'm here. I'm still here. She buried her fingers in his fur, clinging to him like an anchor. We won't let them take you, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The first protesters arrived at sunrise. Tom stood at the gates with a handmade sign, Ranger stays. Behind him, a dozen veterans, some in faded jackets, others leaning on canes, formed a loose circle around James's grave. Ranger, who had barely left the spot in days, lifted his head as they approached. His tail gave a single, hesitant thump against the grass. Lily was there too, her camera clicking away as the townspeople laid down more flags, more notes. Someone had brought a dog bed and set it beside the headstone. A child's mittens, lost in the commotion, lay half buried in the frost. Helen watched it all from a distance, her arms wrapped around herself. This is my fault, she murmured. If I hadn't let him come here, if I'd kept him home. Mark caught her hand. He'd have chewed through the damn door, you know that. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A black sedan with tinted windows had pulled up to the curb. Miss Hargrove wore a suit sharper than a knife and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Mrs. Carter, she said, extending a manicured hand, we appreciate your care of our asset. Helen's fingers curled into fists at her sides. His name is Ranger. The woman's smile tightened. Of course, and he served his country admirably. But his training is proprietary. Apex has a duty to... You left him starving. The words tore out of Helen like a sob. When he... She couldn't say it, couldn't voice the awful truth that after James's death, no one had come for Ranger, no one but them. Miss Hargrove's gaze flicked to the dog, then to the growing crowd. Be that as it may, she said coolly, the contract is clear. We'll be back tomorrow with the proper paperwork. As the sedan pulled away, Lily's camera captured the exact moment Ranger pressed himself against Helen's legs, a low growl rumbling in his chest, not at the retreating car, but at the woman who dared to call him property. The Carter home had become a war room. Tom spread documents across the kitchen table, military regulations, adoption loopholes, the shaky testimony of an Apex kennel worker who'd seen dogs rehomed to private security firms. Clara, the pro bono lawyer with steel in her voice, highlighted clauses and muttered about emotional distress precedents. Ranger, exhausted, slept at Helen's feet, his paws twitching as he dreamed. Of what? James? The desert? Or simply the scent of the boy he loved, lingering on an old t-shirt in the laundry basket? Mark slammed a fist onto the table. There's gotta be something. Clara didn't look up. We need proof they abandoned him. Vet records. Witnesses. Helen stared at the dog's scars, the jagged line along his ribs from shrapnel, the notch in his ear from a close call in Kandahar. Proof enough, she thought bitterly. Then Lily's mother, Emily, burst in holding her phone. You need to see this. The screen showed #SaveRanger trending nationwide, a viral thread from a former Apex trainer. They left him crated for weeks after Carter's death. No grief counseling, no reassignment, just forgotten. And beneath it, thousands of comments, thousands of voices. Clara's pen hovered over a legal pad. This changes everything. As midnight approached, Helen knelt beside Ranger's bed. He lifted his head, blinking sleepily. Remember when James taught you to speak? She whispered, scratching behind his ears the way he liked. You'd howl like the world was ending every time he said sing. Ranger's tail thumped once, then as if on cue, he let out a soft, mournful oroo that shattered her heart all over again. Outside, a car door slammed, flashlight beams cut through the curtains. Apex wasn't waiting until morning. The pounding on the door came at 11:37 p.m. Helen jerked awake, her heart slamming against her ribs. Beside her, Mark was already on his feet, grabbing the baseball bat leaned against the dresser. Downstairs, Ranger erupted into furious barks, not the deep, protective warnings of a guard dog, but the raw, panicked sounds of an animal who knew what was coming. They're here. They're here to take me. Helen stumbled down the stairs in her robe, her bare feet freezing against the hardwood. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she could make out 3 silhouettes. One was Miss Hargrove's razor-straight posture. The other 2 were bulkier, security, law enforcement. Ranger backed against her legs, trembling. His claws scraped the floor as he tried to press himself into the shadows. Mark threw open the door before Helen could stop him. You got a warrant? He snarled. Miss Hargrove held up a clipboard, her smile glacial under the porch light. We don't need one. Military working dogs are federal property. She nodded to the man beside her, a uniformed Apex handler holding a catch pole. We'd prefer to do this civilly. Helen's vision tunneled. That pole. The loop of metal at the end meant to slip around a dog's neck. Ranger knew it too. A guttural sound tore from his throat as he scrambled backward, knocking over a side table. Photos of James scattered across the floor. Basic training graduation, a Christmas morning. James grinning as Ranger licked his face. Look at him, Helen choked out, grabbing one of the pictures. You see this? That's your federal property? That's my son's best friend. Miss Hargrove stepped forward. The handler raised the pole. Then screech. Tires on asphalt, doors slamming. A chorus of shouts erupted from the street as headlights flooded the yard. Tom's pickup skidded to a halt, followed by Emily's minivan, 3 more cars behind them. People spilled out, veterans in jackets, Lily with her camera, neighbors in pajamas holding hastily made signs. You touch that dog! Tom bellowed, limping forward with his cane raised like a weapon. And Franklin burns your contracts to the ground. Miss Hargrove's composure cracked. This absurd, we have... A camera flash. Lily, teeth bared, kept shooting. Say cheese, Mom. The whole internet's watching. For one breathless moment, the night hung suspended. The Apex handler lowered the pole an inch. Ranger panted wildly against Helen's legs, his eyes darting between the strangers and James's photo on the floor. Then, a miracle. Miss Hargrove's phone rang. She turned away, hissed something into it. When she turned back, her face was sheet white. We're withdrawing for tonight. As the Apex team retreated to their car, Tom whooped. The crowd cheered. But Helen sagged against the doorframe, her fingers buried in Ranger's fur, because she'd heard the name on that phone call. Senator Hayes' office is demanding. By morning, #Apex Dog Scandal was trending. The news vans arrived as Helen scrubbed coffee stains from James's dog tags, Ranger's original military ID, which she'd strung around her own neck. On TV, a retired general condemned Apex's shameful neglect of service animals, A viral video showed Ranger flinching from the catchpole, viewed 4 million times in 6 hours. Clara burst in, waving a fax. The judge granted an emergency injunction. They can't take him until the hearing. Mark collapsed into a chair, laughing wetly. Ranger, exhausted from the night's terror, slept curled in a tight ball at his feet. But Helen watched the silent phone, waiting. Because James had once told her, Apex doesn't lose. The courtroom doors loomed like the gates of some terrible fortress. Helen adjusted the collar of her blouse, stiff and unfamiliar against her skin, and clutched Ranger's leash tighter. The dog stood alert at her side, his ears pricked forward, his body vibrating with tension. He didn't understand why they were here in this sterile place that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Helen is afraid. And so, he would be brave for her. Mark reached over and squeezed her hand. His palm was rough and warm, just like James's used to be. Remember, Clara murmured, flipping through her notes one last time. This isn't about property law. This is about family. Across the aisle, Miss Hargrove sat flanked by Apex lawyers, their suits crisp, their expressions bored, as if this were just another contract dispute, as if Ranger weren't panting softly beside Helen, his nose occasionally bumping her wrist. I'm here. I'm with you. The bailiff called the court to order. Describe the dog's condition when he arrived at your home. Helen's voice shook as she answered Clara's question. He was broken. Not just thin, but empty. He'd look at the door for hours, waiting for James to walk through it. She touched Ranger's head. He still does sometimes. In the jury box, a woman dabbed at her eyes. Miss Hargrove's cross-examination was clinical. You're aware, Mrs. Carter, that military working dog ranger was never formally discharged from service? Clara objected before Helen could answer. Your Honor, Sergeant Carter's death was his discharge. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. I'd like to hear from the dog. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. They cleared a space before the bench. Ranger, Helen whispered, kneeling to cradle his face. Show them. She didn't need a command. Ranger knew this ritual by heart. First, he nosed at the pockets of Helen's blazer until she pulled out James's dog tags. He licked them once, I remember, then sat at perfect attention, his scarred flank pressed against her legs. Clara approached with a canvas bag. This was Sergeant Carter's deployment duffel, unwashed since his last return. The moment the zipper opened, Ranger's entire body stiffened, his nostrils flared, and then a sound no one expected. The dog howled, not the trained alert working canine, but the raw, aching cry of a soul recognizing the scent of its other half. He scrambled toward the bag, burying his face in the fabric, his whole body trembling. In the gallery! Tom slammed his fist against his knee. The bailiff looked away. Even the judge removed her glasses. Miss Hargrove stood abruptly. This is theatrics. That animal is a multi-million-dollar detection asset. And yet, the judge interrupted softly, your asset appears to be someone's family. The Apex CEO took the stand, spouting jargon about depreciable equipment and reallocation protocols. Then Clara slid a photo across the table. It showed Ranger's kennel records from the month after James's death. No walks, no socialization, 23-hour confinement. The CEO adjusted his tie. Standard procedure during bereavement reassessment. Clara didn't blink. You left a grieving dog to rot in a cage. Something shattered then, not in the room, in the air. The illusion that this was about paperwork, about contracts. It was about love. And love, as it turned out, had its own legal precedent. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Military working dogs are not lawnmowers, she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. They are not printers. They are living beings who form bonds, who grieve, who love. She fixed Miss Hargrove with a glare. And you, counsellor, should be ashamed. The paperwork took hours. The custody transfer, Ranger's official adoption, was a blur of signatures and tears. But Helen would always remember one moment with crystalline clarity. Ranger, sitting proudly between her and Mark as the judge leaned down to stroke his head. "Case dismissed," she whispered to him. "Go home, soldier." That evening, Ranger did something he hadn't done since James's death. He climbed onto the couch. Not James's old spot. That remained untouched, sacred, but the space between Helen and Mark, where he flopped down with a sigh that seemed to say, "Finally, finally." Outside, the town of Franklin celebrated. The diner served Freedom Ranger burgers. The school choir sang at the Veterans Hall. But inside the Carter home, there was only this: a mother's hand in a father's, a dog's head resting on their joined fingers, and the quiet, unshakable certainty that love, true love, never leaves. It only changes shape.